How about here? Well, let's see.
Welcome to you brave souls. Cool outside and chilly inside as well. But it's beautiful out. Unless you want to walk on the sidewalk because it's almost impossible. So, if this is your first time in a new service, either here or online, let me tell you a bit about our congregation and our faith. Unitarian Universalism has no shared creed, and our individual beliefs are diverse and inclusive. We affirm and promote 7 principles. They are grounded in the humanistic teachings and the world's religion. Our services seek to create connections with others and within, enrich our spiritual values, and represent our calling to live lives of equity and compassion. We are a welcoming congregation, and you are welcome here to be your whole selves. For more information, go to our site, readingcleveland.org, and be sure to, if you are here, to fill out one of these cards if you are new, and give it to the usher or put it in the collection plate. And if you're watching from home, You may want to print the order of service, which is when you first click on to here's where you will find the service. You should see a link for the order of service as well. And look for the yellow cards in your pew rack, and if you don't see one, maybe one of your leaders will help you out. I would like to introduce our guest minister today, Reverend Joe Donatone. He has been here before when he was still in seminary. He is now a certified Unitarian Universalist minister. He's currently completing a chaplain fellowship at the Louis Stokes Cleveland VA Medical Center. And thanks to Reverend Rena, for putting us in touch with him again. Reverend Joe studies the interaction of spirituality and complex emotional pain within serious mental illness diagnoses, suicidality, military sexual trauma, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Reverend Joe enjoys exploring the rich diversity, resilience, and hope found in queer and recovery theologies and their relevance to this work. We now have the chalice lighting. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. Good morning. For our call to worship this morning, please hear these words by Unitarian Universalist Reverend A. Powell Davies. None of our private worlds is big enough for us to live a wholesome life in. We need the wider world of joy and wonder, of purpose and venture, of toil and tears. What are we, any of us, but strangers and sojourners, forlornly wandering through the nighttime until we draw together and find meaning of our lives in one another, dissolving our fears in each other's courage, making music together and lighting torches to guide us through the dark. We belong together. Love is what we need, to love and be loved. Let our hearts be open, and what we would receive from others, let us give. For what is given still remains to bless the giver when the gift is love. Come, let us worship together. And now I invite you, as you are comfortable and safely, to greet those around you.
We did. Thank you. Okay. Thanks.
Morning.
Our opening hymn this morning is number 1064. You can still handle the both home. Please rise or stay up and embody the spirit and join. Holy, I feel the ocean standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my drive and heart can say, I've been sailing all my life. Never harbored or port have I known. Wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I find the starry sea, leaning o'er the edge of wonder, asking questions into the deep. Drifting here in my ship's companions, all we wind and fair souls, making our way by miles of heavens, in our beautiful I give thanks to the waves of rolling fill the great winds surging me on. Beneath the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my Savior's song. I was born above the heavens, never harbored or thought have I known. My universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my Please be seated.
We continue to forge a sacred space this morning through our ritual of sharing our joys and concerns. This is a chance for any of us who have something on our hearts, on our souls, on our minds, to bring them in concern, to place a pebble into this water in remembrance of those. We have 2 notes that were written this morning to make special note of. The first, which I very much second, is absolute gratitude for our wonderful camera person, Sharon, for all of the extraordinary work she's doing, making sure we can stream these episodes, which a congregation full of very cold people are especially thankful for. We also have a note for positive thoughts from Margaret, who is a dear friend of things. As I invite you all up to drop stones into this water, I just try to invite you to please come up on the front aisle and return to your seats to the side aisle to make sure with clump up and are very careful about our others. And with that, I invite you to this table. As always, we close with a final stone into the water for those joys and concerns that go unspoken this morning. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm so impressed by all of you. I cannot believe you're here with us, navigating we're this little children we'd like to be. But how lucky, because we're here to celebrate week 6 of Child God, which I know is the kind of thing that just makes us all just warm right up. There is a sense though, because we're really steaming ahead here. Now in February, we've been through so many big ideas, so many huge concepts that fill up our principles. One of the great things about the child is you really see the flow, the development, and the logic of these principles. We started with the simple existence of each of us as people in that first principle. We touched on our spiritual selves and our growth in principle 3. We talked about our orientation to the truth in principle 4. And then last week, we sort of transitioned and we started talking about our relationships between one another, how we begin to relate to other people, by being true to our conscience, and having respectful and a democratic process with one another. Unsurprisingly, here in week 6 now, we're making an even bigger turn, and that focus on the individual now becomes actually an orientation about how all of us will relate to one another. This sort of idea of what we will be as communities and as nations. Because principle 6 is a commitment to the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. World community, that's the phrase. And peace, liberty, and justice for all. So this principle, the world opens right up, and the horizon becomes much bigger. This isn't just about individuals, it's not just about ourselves, it's about the whole world. It also strikes me, this is sort of, I always think this is the Star Trek Federation of Planets principle. This is the vision of the world that's built into this. And I have to say, if that doesn't hit you the right way, if Star Trek isn't your thing, don't worry. Somebody in another pew just found out that the 6 principles are their favorite principle. That might be an optimistic take for the 6 principle, I will say. The commitment to make the world look like Star Trek, or at least the direction of that kind of a society. Because the other side of hearing that principle comes to me as an educator. And I hear this principle a little bit of a different way, because that commitment to the world, committing with peace, liberty, and justice, the teacher inside of me perks up, because I've heard of this assignment before. In fact, I think I've assigned this kind of assignment before. I received that assignment as a student, and I've given it as a teacher. Make no mistake. Principle number 6. It's group project. Ooh, group project. If there's any kind of assignment you expect students to hate and complain about, group projects. And I will also say, as a teacher, I completely understand why. A group project means you have to work with, like, 5 other kids you don't know. You're all going to get 1 grade. You as a group member, you don't have any authority to tell anyone what to do, but somehow you are all supposed to agree to collaborate and share the work so you can do it well. And I'm sure no one here is surprised to hear that it's pretty rare for 6 students in school to share group work perfectly. Talk to 10 students graduating American high school or college, I guarantee 9 of them will say that they hated group projects more than anything else they have to do. But here's the rub, here's the thing. I can tell you why teachers assign group projects. In fact, I think we all know them if we've spent a little time in the world. And that is, they are one of the realest experiences you have in school. Any adult person knows how much of their lives are group projects. Wherever you work, that's a group project. Going to the doctor, that's a group project. Navigating a 4-way intersection with just stop signs is a group project. Here's one that shouldn't surprise anyone here. Being a member of your local UU community is a group project. Our 6th principle is amazing because of how gigantic its hope is and how truthfully and candidly it boils down the problem of realizing that hope. And that problem, as well as the possibility, is people. It's always just about people. Because amazing, peace, liberty, and justice, they are all attainable. We have all the pieces, we have all the parts. They're always in front of us. But when we talk about global community, and we use that impossibly audacious word, universalism, we're talking about a group project that involves every single kind of participant you can imagine. Every frustrating personality, every person you've known who definitely has a screw loose, every unsavable addict, every sanctimonious holier-than-thou you've ever met. It includes every quiet introvert, every sarcastic voice, every fervent believer. This principle reminds us that the most important thing we all do in our lives is participating in this grand group project. So on behalf of the universe or truth or any of those things that go behind these few principles that they point us to, the words of wisdom I can share for all of us to chew on this week as we think about this principle and what it means to our lives are the same words that have been used by every single teacher who has ever dealt with a student who complained about a group project, who comes complaining about how hard it is to work in a group, how everyone isn't doing their share, how frustrating one member is, why it's so unfair that we're being graded as a group. And those words are these. I'm sorry, and I understand your frustration, but that's the assignment. You have to learn to work together.
The meditation piece is by Reverend Margaret Belizaire. She became picking the UU around 2013, following the advice of a friend to check them out, and she has not looked back. As it happened, the congregation she checked out was the UU Society of Cleveland. She is one of 4 current ministers who were nurtured at the society over about 15 years, which is a source of pride and joy. Again, as it happened, Reverend Marguerite is the new minister at Reverend Donatone's home church in Florida. Here is Marguerite's prayer for a while in the struggle. Spirit, help us to understand that we each have a role in justice work. For our liberation is tied to one another's. Help us to find our way and commit to it. Help us to give our all to this and hold nothing back, for precious lives depend on it. May we summon the courage to tear down this system of injustice and get busy creating a world community with justice for all.
Please join me on Sun Meditation number 123, Spirit Blood.
Today's plate collection is for the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. I would guess that there are few, if any of you, who are not familiar with the Cleveland Food Bank, which is one of the largest and most effective charities in this area. I can give you some statistics, and I'll give you a few. 343,000 people were served by the food bank, and it's more than 1,000 partner agencies in fiscal year 2021 across the 6-county service area. 1 in 6 people in the food bank service area is food insecure, meaning they do not know where their next meal will come from. 1 in 5 children live in poverty across our service area. Cleveland's child poverty rate has been consistently among the highest of large U.S. cities. In Cuyahoga County, 30% of seniors live in poverty. Some of the services, specialized services, are for children, such as a backpack for kids, which provides children with food to take home over the weekend. Summer feeding, feeding children over the summer when they have limited or no access to the school breakfast and lunch programs. A program specifically for seniors, such as senior markets in senior-specific locations. Senior boxes, which provide food assistance for low-income seniors. We send them the box once a month. Senior meals and grocery delivery. Food bank partners with food pantries to facilitate monthly delivery of groceries. Those are the statistics, but what you need to remember is that many of our neighbors are making difficult choices, whether to buy food or pay for rent or utilities or boots for their children. They are the working poor who struggle each day to provide life's necessities for their families. So please give deep and help support the Cleveland Food Bank. Please join in the acceptance of gifts found on the yellow card. We offer these gifts with gratitude, and we acknowledge the constant gifts of time, talent, and treasure that strengthen and nourish this congregation as a reflection of our commitment to community within and without. Our purposeful spirituality that is ever searching and growing, and our intentional actions that lead to greater justice in our congregation, our city, our nation, and our world. Thank you to Reverend Joe for providing this charming story from Lessons from the Geese by Dr. Robert McNeish. The geese flying in formation honk to encourage those up front to keep up their speed. Driving along the commercial corridor near my house, I noticed that one of the used car dealerships had changed the message on its sign. Instead of touting a holiday sale or good financing rates, the block letters read, "Honk if you love." I was thoroughly delighted. I remembered how encouraging it felt whenever drivers beeped their support as they passed a demonstration or protest march I was a part of. I felt like this message could just those actions deeper motivation, love for our fellow beings, which sits at the core of all social justice work. I imagine cars whizzing past this roadside pulpit of sorts, people smiling as they tooted their horn on behalf of humanity. As I drew closer to the sign, I noticed that under the word love was an American flag, previously indistinguishable. Apparently, boisterous love was reserved only for the United States. Suddenly, the acknowledgement of our wide and profound connectedness had been reduced to affection for one narrow sliver of a human population. I felt diminished. I'm better off taking my cue from Canada geese than used car dealers. Geese fly much further as a group than they ever could alone. When a goose has been injured, 2 or 3 others stay with it on the ground until it recuperates. And as the skein migrates, they honk to remind their fellow birds that they're nearby, ready to help, encouraging each other through the long hours of flight. If we have as much sense as geese, as Dr. Robert McNeish wrote, then our hearts must be moved by more than parochial interests. If we hope to foster a more compassionate world, we must practice caring for one another with joy and over long distances. If justice is to be realized, then our voices must speak loudly, even boisterously, of love.
Good morning. Good morning. Bear with me for just a second while I get technology to cooperate. So first, I need to offer a bit of correction. I want to make sure that we are giving credit where credit is due. That reflection I chose, but I did not write. That reflection was written by Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich, who is a minister, writer, musician, and activist dedicated to racial inclusion, deep collaboration, and courageous kindness. And they identify as a non-binary bisexual person of color. So I think it's especially important for me not to take credit for their work. But I love that reading, and as fate would have it, or as the universe would put in front of me, the other day I was way out on the west side in Avon, right? I'm going to the Costco over there, and in the parking lot, I see these 3 geese walking through the parking lot. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. There's some geese, and we're going to talk about geese tomorrow. And I noticed that one of the geese's wings had been flipped completely backward. Stuck. And there were 2 geese, lo and behold, walking with that goose, staying with it. And I thought that was just such a profound message of caring for those who need our care the most. And that ties in with the message that I hope to bring us today. So first, I want to thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be with you this morning. And as mentioned, I'm Reverend Joe Donato. Last time I was with you all, I was still in seminary, so I appreciate that opportunity to come and practice, the work of sermon craft back then, and I hope that I do justice to that previous work today. Now, Reverend Randy told me that y'all have been working your way through the 7 principles, and I really love this exercise. I love the season of Chanukah, because I think it really helps us understand Unitarian Universalism on a much deeper level. Now, there are a lot of UUs that will say things like, well, I'm a first principle UU, or I'm a 7th principle UU. And historically, these are the sexy principles. These are the ones that do the heavy lifting. The first principle reminds us that everyone matters, and the 7th principle reminds us that everything matters because it's all ultimately interconnected. And when we put these 2 particular principles together, we have this sort of shorthand theology that we can apply to almost anything we do in our congregations. These heavy hitters tend to get all the glory within our movement. But what do we do with the rest of them? What do we do with 2, 3, 5, 6? They deserve our attention too. And so today I've been asked to explore one of these middle principles, the 6th. It reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all." Now, on the surface, this sounds very, very simple. It's really in line with the rest of our values, so much so that it can seem a little bit like a gimme. Of course, a love-motivated movement that celebrates every single person and the interconnections that hold us all together will certainly champion peace, liberty, and justice for all. And for many of us, these words can sound pretty familiar. Any public school student since the 60s has recited "with liberty and justice for all" nearly every morning of their education. And our 6th principle uses the same words that end the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, some of us, when we see that, skim over this principle because the wording can trigger a little bit of an ick response. It sounds too much like the Pledge of Allegiance. And compulsory recitation of the pledge is emblematic of nationalism and conformity. The practice calls into question the role of government in education and in our lives. And then we further complicated things in 1954 by adding the phrase "under God." And now the pledge can bring up questions about the overlap of church and state and remind us of the Red Scare of the 50s when communism was hiding around every corner. It's a little bit of a mess. So for those of you who have trouble with this wording, I hear you, and I honor your continued struggle. But our 6th principle is not the Pledge of Allegiance. And our recent ancestors were very careful and intentional in adopting the principles that we use to guide our movement. And I want to take a moment to state, these principles are not etched in stone on purpose. These principles are bylaws subject to continuous review. So if that particular wording catches in your craw and you can't let it go, now's the time for some grassroots movement to make an adjustment. So again, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Unfortunately, we live in a world that is broken, where these blessings are not guaranteed to all people. All too often, nations fight to redefine borders at the expense of peace. Corporate freedoms suppress personal liberty, and maintaining a system of oppression favoring a small collection of elite denies justice. So I want to pull our exploration out of the realm of ideas and theories and into the real world for a moment. And being a Floridian for quite a long time, I'm going to use Florida as an example. The Florida governor has two favorite targets: immigration and education. In the past 6 months alone, he has led the Florida legislature to pass increasingly restrictive and punitive immigration laws. In its most recent effort, a bill would require the Florida Highway Patrol to take on ICE responsibilities and detain and interrogate anyone they even suspect is undocumented, just for driving down the highway. In another series of executive orders, the Florida Department of Education has been mandated to revamp the state government and civics curriculum. High school government courses will include state-mandated discussions of political ideologies, including, quote, lessons on the evils of communism and totalitarianism. Does that sound familiar? Maybe a little bit like that Red Scare of the 50s? Now, additionally, at the governor's request, the Board of Education voted to prohibit schools from teaching critical race theory because it, quote, teaches kids to hate their country. And it's not just Florida. The Catholic Legal Immigration Network Clinic tracks legislation nationally. And following the presidential election of 2020, they predicted a backlash in conservative states and localities, retaliating for potential pro-immigration rights policies forthcoming at the federal level. Now they write, quote, generally speaking, we saw a wave of conservative and anti-rights states legislation in 2021. These included proposals to limit their right to vote, proposals targeting transgender youth, retaliatory measures for Black Lives Matter demonstrators, and 8 states passed legislation banning education on critical race theory, including any classroom discussion about conscious and unconscious bias, privilege, discrimination, and oppression. They go on. The general anti-rights trend certainly carried through to legislation proposed on immigration this year. Many states proposed legislation that would force collaborations with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection on immigration detainer requests. It would bolster funding for border security, increase surveillance of immigrants, adopt e-verify laws, and more. From January through August of 2021, just January through August of last year, Clinic tracked 417 pieces of this type of legislation. Now, Education Week reports, quote, in at least 10 states, legislators have proposed bills that require administrators to list every book, reading, and activity that teachers use in their lessons, a process that educators argue would be cumbersome and expensive. Some of these bills also require districts to give parents prior right of review for new curriculum adoptions and library additions, end quote. So these restrictive, nationalist, and exclusionary pressures seek to continually narrow our focus. These pressures call for exclusion, to exclude immigrants, exclude liberal ideas, to exclude any challenges to the status quo. And these efforts run contrary to the liberal and progressive ideals we hold up as Unitarian Universalists. And our 6th principle reminds us of that. So how exactly do we affirm and promote a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all people? In 1968, a Brazilian activist named Paulo Freire wrote a book titled The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. As an educator, he looked at these same challenges through the lens of his classroom. Now, considering how many of these modern efforts to narrow our focus center within educational spaces, including a revolutionary educator in today's talk seems pretty appropriate. Freire was a proponent of a philosophical system called dialectics. Go with me here for a moment. So dialectics explores the relationship between seemingly opposite things. So here in this example, I'm thinking of community and individuality. A dialectic understanding of these two concepts suggests that one cannot exist without the other. As another example, think night and day. Our understanding of one requires understanding the other. Dialectic concepts are always in dialogue with one another. So without night, there is no day. Without community, there is no concept of an individual. And that can seem like a bit of a paradox. If we don't simultaneously have an awareness of the larger world we all live in, we wouldn't be able to draw the ideas us and them. To deny our membership in the larger whole of humanity is to deny our ability to make that contrast, to give ourselves an individual identity. So these nationalist immigration policies try to disregard the rest of the globe. Exclusionary educational policies try to ignore the experiences of the marginalized. They seek to put so much distance between the two halves of the dialectic, America and the immigrant, standard curriculum, radical ideas, the oppressor and the oppressed, us and them. Put so much distance between these two sides that it hopes to break the connection altogether. But it can't. Now also, in the middle of all of this is a juicy little irony. Despite this desire to draw borders and to rally around national identity, we live in an increasingly globalized world. The same people calling for us to close our borders reap the benefits of this global marketplace and the demand that we can call on for low-cost goods. There's an excellent chance that the shirt that you are wearing today and the car that you drove here in traveled thousands of miles through several nations in a multi-stage process to bring it to market. Corporations place every part of this process within the country or region where it's cheapest to produce or complete that part of the process. And globalization has kept prices on goods really low, meaning that Americans can consume more. We can live in 3,500 square foot houses jam-packed with stuff. We can fill our shopping carts to overflowing with low-cost food, so much so that if most of us dug into the back of our pantries, and I suggest you should, especially for things like the food bank, but if we were to dig into our pantries all the way to the back, we would inevitably find something. Some can of something that has expired. Something so cheap that we forgot about it altogether and let it go to waste. Many of us have grown accustomed to having more than we need and having the purchasing power to demand rock-bottom prices on the goods that we consume. But there's a cost. The first cost is hypocrisy. When the alarm bells ring to close our border, the call is really just to close our border to people. The justification for this alarm is further hypocrisy. Nationalists preach a false doctrine of scarcity. We don't have enough jobs. We don't have enough resources to support more people. We don't have enough space to put them. These are utter lies and nonsense. We have plenty of resources. What we lack is the willingness to share them. Wealth inequality is real. Greed is real. Scarcity, the kind they talk about, is an illusion. But that's not the only cost of globalization. Each stage of this globalized process of creating cheaper and cheaper goods takes advantage of someone somewhere. Manufacturing waste gets dumped on developing nations. Global climate change at the hands of major industrial players destroys the homes of indigenous people across the globe. Corporations move manufacturing to countries where the labor laws are lax and they can exploit workers. Vital resources like water are diverted from rivers upstream for agriculture, creating scarcity, fear, and political unrest for the communities downstream who are desperate for the water. Governments wage wars for oil rights to control the oil needed to ship this stuff several times around the globe and to do so as cheaply as possible. Governments bend to the will of corporations, twisting in knots to keep the global marketplace running regardless of the people exploited in the process. And everyone sitting in this room and standing in this pulpit today benefits from that exploitation several dozen times a day. That's a really uncomfortable thing to sit with. Confronting these truths is a tough task. And it's an easy thing to find a distraction, a patsy, someone else to blame. The easy thing is to lean into this opium of nationalism and say, that's not my problem. We need our quality of life. They need to make better decisions for themselves. America stands on proud, noble values. They are other, they are lesser, they just don't get it. Just look at how they live. They're not like all of us. We're the United States of America. They're just backward third world nations. And to quote the previous president of the United States, why do we want all these people from these blank hole countries coming here? That's where this leads. It leads to utter dehumanization. So honk if you love America. Now, friends, I don't want this to sound like some screed on how much I dislike America, because I love America. I'm an American, right? But I think we are big enough to look at ourselves critically and to make the changes. And if the people who are going to look at ourselves critically are not here in this room, in this movement, then where are they? And friends, this is the reason that I am passionate about our sixth principle. It imagines a world where we have solved so many of these problems. A world where we strive for peace, liberty, and justice for all. So just the other night, I was watching the Sex and the City reboot titled And Just Like That. And it's not great. I'm not endorsing it. It's problematic for a lot of different reasons. But sometimes I get a little nostalgic for the shows that shaped my young adult years. So anyhow, in this episode, Charlotte invites Carrie and Miranda to come help paint a shelter for victims of domestic violence. And Carrie Bradshaw, the lead character, being fabulous, says, oh, that's okay, I'll just write a check. Now Charlotte and Miranda stare back aghast. A little comedic banter ensues. And finally, Miranda puts her foot down and says, you can't just be the white lady who writes a check. So the reboot, clearly, is trying hard to update itself on some of our modern sensibilities and to remedy some of the problematic aspects of the original series. And this particular moment stuck with me. Because, yeah, actually, you can just write a check. Women's shelters and any cause aligned with social justice rely on those checks. They need those checks. They need a whole lot of checks. So if you can write a check, write the check. But there's also an opportunity to unpack this idea a little more. especially concerning what we've been talking about today. So let's return to Paulo Freire for a moment. The first part of his philosophy is basically this. Oppressors seek to dehumanize those they oppress. Liberation from oppression is a humanizing process, and the key to liberation is education. And effective education relies on the co-creation of meaning between the teacher and student. Now, when we're thinking about how we might go about affirming world community with peace, liberty, and justice, we might begin to think in this teacher-student model, but instead, we might replace teacher with privilege and student with disadvantage. Freire hated the notion that a teacher might stand in front of the class and pour knowledge into these little empty vessels that are the students. The hierarchical model dehumanizes the student by not valuing the fact that that student has insight, awareness, and lived experiences that the student would have brought to the classroom. It made them receptive objects. In his ideal, the teacher has as much to learn from the student as the student can learn from the teacher. When they work outside the bounds of the oppressive programming that says otherwise, they can begin to discover truths and create meaning together, the co-creation of meaning. So when you find an opportunity, how do you want to promote and affirm a global community with peace, justice, and liberty? Will you just write a check, or will you do more? Could you write a check and show up to volunteer? Could you write a check and call your state representative? Could you write a check and mentor a child or offer to drive someone to their court date? Exploring our 7 principles and challenging our individual ideas is akin to writing a check. It's step 1. It's necessary work, what we're doing right now. By informing ourselves and challenging ourselves to grow, we affirm the covenant that we make to one another as Unitarian Universalists to affirm these values. But let us widen our focus. The stretch, the spiritual growth, the deeper meaning-making comes when we carry these values into the world and we dive into the hands-on work of making change. In those moments on the soup line, or seated around the table stuffing envelopes, we have the opportunity to engage with others aligned with our cause. And we become true allies to those people seeking liberation. In those moments, we can share and learn from one another. Learn from the stories of those we seek to help. Learn from their lived experience. And we can better understand the challenge at hand. We can affirm and honor the humanity of those we seek to help, and thereby celebrate and affirm the humanity within ourselves. That's how we build world community. That's how we get to the peace, justice, and liberation. The imagined borders fade. The concepts of us and them soon fail to define us, giving way to the reality of we. I'm going to close with the words of Reverend Sean Parker Dennison, who I think puts it best. He writes, "As naive or impossible as the 6th principle may seem, I'm not willing to give up on it. In the face of our culture's apathy and fear, I want to imagine and help create a powerful vision of peace by peaceful means, liberty by liberatory means, and justice by just means. I want us to believe and live as if we believe. That a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all is possible. There is no guarantee that we will succeed. but I can assure you that we will improve the world by trying. May it be so. Done. And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit as you are comfortable and able to sing our closing hymn, the Fire.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Let us read together our COVID covenant. In the loving community, we welcome everyone, absolutely everyone, into this space of worship and fellowship. In this time of pandemic, we covenant to respect one another by considering the safety and comfort of others before ourselves, to respect policies our leadership has established, and to take all of our steps with one another with grace and understanding, as we work to make this truly a safe place for all people.
Friends, as we go out into the world today, may you carry our values with you and share them freely. May you find the opportunity to join in community with another, such that we can promote peace, liberty, and justice for all. Amen.
And we will now extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of the community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.